My guests on Conversations today are the two guys I had here with me last week, John Robinson and Derek Wilson. Welcome back, guys. It's good to have you here.
Hi again.
Good morning.
Now, over the last week, I've kind of been kicking around in my brain the things we talked about last week, and the title that we explored was the probable collapse of world society in 20 years' time. And John, PhD in applied mathematics, lecturer, Derek, a retired architect with many years' experience. Both men concerned about the direction of our world, peak oil, growth, economics, and that's a very poor description of what we talked about last week. So as we kick off, guys, the topic we finished talking about last week, we said we would start with this week, and that's growth. So Derek, tell us your concerns about growth in the context of our world, economy, local, national, whatever.
Well, may I start by quoting Daniel Quinn, who said in 2000, if we continue to consume the world until there's no more to consume, then there's going to come a day, sure as hell, when our children or our children's children are going to look back on us, you and me, and say to themselves, my God, what kind of monsters were these people? So we're particularly concerned with the whole growth economy, whereby at the present point growth is killing us. Now just imagine you read any newspaper or watch TV or listen to the radio, and practically every day you will see or hear officialdom, someone, politicians, economists, the business executives, and of course the media, saying that we must have growth and still more growth.
And that was the thing that was just going through my mind. Isn't that the modern dogma, that things must grow to survive?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And of course, because of this, growth is in fact killing us. Now the earth is finite. The resources that we use on earth are finite, and yet we continue to use them and require more and more. We've journeyed along for about 200 years on the whole economic growth system, where we've had a materialistic consumer world in which growth is considered to be of great benefit to everyone. Well, of course, the underdeveloped world must have some kind of growth, but it's the Western and westernized worlds which have to realize that growth is in fact killing us. And it's about time we looked at other ways of living our lives. And economy, of course, is one situation that should be examined fully to start with, because the economy is up the spout and we cannot continue under the present economy.
Okay, before we explore economy, let's just kick around a little bit about what you talked about growth. I can picture my grandmother and mother having to light the fire under the copper to boil the water to clean the clothes, and they had to stir the copper with a great big wooden paddle, and then there was a hand wringer. Today my wife walks to this modern machine that flashes lights and has computers on board, and with the biggest effort is actually lifting the wet clothes out at the end. So growth in some terms is beneficial and it's good. How do we decide what is useful growth and what is unproductive?
I think that's a very good point to pick up on. What has happened is that there's been a lot of modern gadgets, and I too remember my mother heating up the water, and then we got a wringer, and that was much better than wringing it by hand, and so on. So you've got a lot of equipment now that allows people to to do all their home work, their work at home, much more efficiently. And what has come of it, what has not come of it, of course, is leisure. In the 70s, we were talking about the new technologies and realising the benefits of all these home gadgetries, and realising that more women would join the workforce because it's no longer a full-time job to be at home doing those tasks, because they can be done so much more easily. But instead of going towards a 30-hour week, we have 10% unemployment. Remember that the unemployment in New Zealand consists of first the official unemployment and then the hidden unemployment of people who've gone on invalids benefits and sickness benefits, which have been great growth of people in that. When you talk about growth, we could be talking about growth of population and the way in which, when the world population is too great, it will collapse. But this is a really interdisciplinary subject, the fate of the world. Everything is mixed up in it. So that's the delight of being a futures research person. You, instead of being told, you stick to your subject, mate, you're a fluid mechanics person, you know about fluid mechanics, I know about economics. No, I have to understand the economics. And the economics of the situation is quite intriguing and very simple. We need growth in an economy when there are some needs to be satisfied. Okay, so you've had the Great Depression, you've had the Second World War, you've had Europe in shreds, you've got all these new gadgets to bring online, so that from 1945 to 1970, economic growth was a great thing. But what happened in around 1970 was a thing called overproduction. All this is written of in Marx. It's very old thinking. But what you then have is another cycle where you're liable to go in from growth into overshoot, into depression. And what has happened from 1970 to the present time is a really fascinating period in economic history, because we've had this overproduction and the whole system has not collapsed. It has moved along in a rather random way, of course, with some hiccups all over the place. It hasn't collapsed completely, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's moved into a bubble economy, so all the excess money that was created and is looking for a way to create more profit, this is basic capitalism, that's what it's all about, having money, investing it and making more money, has gone into a series of bubbles. And it's a breaking of one such bubble in 2008, which has caused the current problem. And remember, before you blame the bankers for the terrible things they did, they actually were doing what they were asked to do. Lots of people had billions of dollars, adding up to trillions, and they said, please do something with this money and move it around in such a way that will make a profit. So they did that, and they had to be more and more creative about it, because the basic needs of producing more weren't there anymore. I've mentioned 1970. Well, I was at the OECD in about 1978 and presented with a huge amount of data which made the point that in the early 70s there was overproduction in shipping, chemicals, cars, motorbikes. There's all sorts of overproduction. And once you ask those questions, you start getting to grips with what sort of economy we actually do have. And one feature of our economy is that it's not a pure capitalist economy at all. It's a highly controlled, centralised economy. Here in the West, there's a thing called the military-industrial complex. And you'll notice that as money gets short in the US government, they keep the military going, and that's kept the economy going. So it's even worse than you might think. This growth economy is kept on its feet by spending on arms and by having wars now and again. It's a truly dreadful scene. But the alternative, you know, would be to the 30-hour week, and all of us just being satisfied with a pretty good life, because by 1970 and certainly now, we can be sure that every household can have a washing machine. Even a dishwasher becomes common.
Right, but the problem is, though, that with to keep the industry going, that washing machine now has to have a finite life. And so we use up more of the world's resources, so we keep the factory going, to keep the people employed, to make more money, etc., etc. For example, a salesman in one of the local companies was telling me that when he sold a fridge 25 years ago, he knew it'd last 25 years. When he sells a fridge now, he knows it'll last 5 years. So why, that's the whole part of the economic overconsumption, isn't it? That we are killing our world by building, generating, destroying, and starting that whole cycle again.
Yes, I think this is a key point. I'm one of those old people who try to mend things, and if something breaks down, I get out the screwdriver or the spanner and generally mend it. And the kids say, "Hey Dad, what are you mucking around with that for? Buy a new one." So you keep the wheels turning over. And to me, of course, from my upbringing on a farm in the 30s, this is entirely wrong. And this is one of our troubles, I think.
Right. Now let's come back to where we started off this conversation. You're talking about that growth is killing us. Now, growth surely has to be defined in a whole series of different, what's the word I want, things. There's human growth because the population is getting bigger exponentially. There is the growth in what? Economies. So how do we keep a world system running while the population is growing, for example? What's the solution that we're looking at?
Well, isn't this a key point, that the population, as you say, is continuing to grow? And John can comment better on the population, but I feel somehow we have to limit the population. Certainly in the Western world, the population is slowly decreasing, but as far as I know, in the underdeveloped countries, it is still not decreasing and is likely to go on increasing for some time. I think 2.1 is the replacement number that is required. John can comment on that. But the Western world is tending to go below 2.1 now, whereas the underdeveloped countries are not.
Well, the 2.1 refers to a stable population, will stay stable. If you have a youthful population and you have 2.1, it'll keep growing for about 50 years, and that's where New Zealand is at. I would voice the rather strange opinion that we all belong to the world and we should all be part of it and we should all be responsible, and that we should all work hard at reducing our population. New Zealand does not have a population policy, and we've tried to get different groups to talk about population. They simply refuse to. The extreme example was the United Fund for Population Affairs, where we even talked to the CEO all the way from New York, passing through Wellington, and we said, you should be talking more about population, and she just walked away from us. People are just not interested in that population.
Let's talk about denial for a moment, because I think that's probably one of the underlying factors of what we're talking about. Peak oil, people want to deny the fact that oil is a finite resource. There's a denial that we've got more people exponentially every year than we had before, and we're going to reach the point of we've reached the point of overconsumption, haven't we? And yet, if we went and grabbed the average person off the street out there, they wouldn't want to hear it, and that goes right through to government. So what's going on? If the facts are self-evident, and I think many of them are, why is there this gross denial right across the spectrum?
Well, I think we've got to realise at the beginning that denial isn't just a river in Egypt. It's a very large problem, as you say, and takes many forms. One is the denial by people because they don't want to hear about it. It's nothing to do with them. It's somebody else's business. Somebody else will look after it. Then there is denial because it really is a problem and it affects their business or their whole outlook on life if they accept the fact that we are in denial.